Good evening, all. Hi, Daniel. Hi, Francesco. Daniel, very nice, great to have you on stage.
Yeah, great to be here.
Hi, Francesco. How are you doing?
Hello, everyone. I'm fine. Thank you. Hi, all. Hi, Daniel.
Hi there.
So I wanted to say again, thanks. I'm following you since years now, and I really appreciate your work on Bitcoin mining and energy industry. It's been amazing, all the report that you have made on sustainability, on wasting, how Bitcoin is not really bad for the environment, but it's helping the environment. It will be contributing clean the environment. And a person, I also think the narrative on Bitcoin bad for the environment, they consuming too much energy, being one of the strongest and one of the hardest to debunk for the common, for the average person. There are others that are or are nonsense or are easier to debunk, but this is harder to debunk. And I'm using a lot of your work in order to explain to people that Bitcoin, if you're an environmentalist, you should be in favor of Bitcoin as you are. So great to have you here.
Fantastic. Keep up the great work. How are you finding it? Are you getting a good response from people when you take that message to them?
Yes, also it's mostly related to the price. So once the price is up, then they are listening more, and only some of them they are doing more due diligence. And after I shared some articles and some videos, then they understand. For some others, many they don't want to put the work. And for me, it's important that they know that they can contact me. I guess once we will have a higher price, they will be listening to us more. Important is they know who to contact. What do you think?
You're doing great work. You're removing one of the big blocks of people, so well done.
Thanks. Yes. Yeah, I'm trying. I think many Bitcoiners are trying. Maybe we can start with where we are now, like the current level of sustainability for Bitcoin mining and Bitcoin mining for how we can use Bitcoin mining to help the environment, to clean the environment, meaning reducing methane emissions.
Sure. So right now, our models are telling us that we've reached 56.5% sustainable energy use. So to put that in context, that's more than any major industrialized nation. That's more than any other industry, and that's more than the 50% threshold that Tesla said they would start accepting Bitcoin payments again. How do we know that? Because we've taken the Cambridge model, we've taken the known limitations of the Cambridge model, which is that it has a 2.5-year out-of-date mining map, and we've updated it with the latest data. And we've also allowed for the fact that their model does not include off-grid mining, which is now 31% of all mining activity. We've added that in. And the amazing thing we found, which shouldn't really have surprised anyone, is because Bitcoin miners are incentivized to use the cheapest possible source of electricity. Well, guess what that is in most cases these days? In most cases, it's renewable energy. So what that means is that these off-grid Bitcoin mining companies, they have around an 80% preference towards sustainable energy sources. So if you can imagine building a model, as Cambridge did, which excludes all off-grid mining, 31% of all mining, that's going to lead to a massive skew in your model. It's analogous to saying, you've just hired me to do some political polling to predict an election result, and I'm only going to poll people who live in urban areas. I'm going to ignore everyone who lives in a rural area. So I'm only going to poll 70% of the population. Well, that's obviously going to lead to some big skews in my findings. And so when we factor those two things in, we bring the mining map up to date, and we allow for off-grid mining. That's what gives us that very high degree of confidence that we've reached well in excess of 50%. And our models are telling us it's more like 57%, almost 57 at the moment. So that's amazing. Now that's not enough to say, hey, that means it's great for the environment. Then say, well, but it's still using over 40% fossil fuel and it's doing nothing useful. Because for the most part, most critics have relied on media portrayals of Bitcoin mining, and the use of Bitcoin has never been presented particularly well, other than it's used for criminals, it's used for terrorists, it's a speculative asset, it's a Ponzi scheme, the usual suspects. So these are the messages that people hear. And so for these people who have never actually heard the true use cases of Bitcoin, then any use of energy seems to be too much. So the second part of my work was really looking at it's not enough to establish its baseline sustainable energy use. I've had plenty of critics reach out, grudgingly accept that it's now over 50%, but still say it doesn't mean it's good for the environment. And so the second part of my work has been looking at how Bitcoin has been a net positive for the environment. And there's many, many different cases. In fact, there's so many cases that we can get into danger of inundating people with too many details. So we can't go into all the details at once of heat recycling, methane mitigation, grid stabilization, being a buyer of first resort for energy, being a buyer of last resort, frequency modulation of the grid. People go, what? I don't get it. What's frequency modulation? And so a better solution is just to pick one of these things and say, look, it could be methane mitigation, or it could be helping the grid to be built out using a higher basis of sustainable energy. These are the two big ones that people in the mainstream care about and people who care about the environment care about. Are we mitigating methane, or are we helping the grid to be built out using more sustainable energy? And in both cases, Bitcoin has a major role to play. It has a major role to play with methane mitigation because Bitcoin is the only technology in many cases that can mitigate methane profitably. And the reason for that is that unique to Bitcoin, among any different industry, is that around 80% of all its operational costs is electricity. And when it comes to environmental cleanup, that's a wonderful accident because what that means is that Bitcoin miners will be prepared to spend more in capital to chase cheap electricity. In inconvenient places like landfills where methane's just leaking into the atmosphere, contributing to climate change, or in oil fields where methane's just leaking into the atmosphere, or in farms where methane's just leaking into the atmosphere. And for Bitcoin miners, that's a source of fuel. It's expensive in terms of capital to get it, but they'll invest it because it's worth it to get that cheap energy in return. And that is something very unique to Bitcoin. And then the second area, which is in terms of helping to build out the grid, we've got a number of peer-reviewed studies now, plus also the first-hand experience of multiple different grid operators that tell us that what Bitcoin miners have been telling us for the last 5 years is actually not greenwash, it's true. And that is that when you have flexible data centers, very flexible data centers, and there is no more flexible data center than a Bitcoin miner. And by flexible, I mean the ability to turn off and on very fast and very responsively. When you have that sort of user, it is the absolute perfect user to be able to stack more intermittent, variable, renewable energy onto the grid, i.e. solar and wind. If you try and put more solar and wind power on the grid, but you want to have inflexible users of electricity, it doesn't work. Because you have a source of electricity, which is intermittent, when the sun goes behind a cloud or when the wind stops blowing, but you have a user of electricity who wants it all the time. Well, that's not going to work. And the only way a grid operator can make it work is if they have backup baseload energy, which in most cases is going to mean more fossil fuel. So Bitcoin mining allows grid operators to escape the tyranny of where they're asked to keep grids stable and they're asked to make them more sustainable at the same time. And it provides a unique pathway for grid operators to be able to do this. Again, this is not just some Bitcoin miner theory. This is not theory, this is history. It's been done. Grid operators have seen it being done. Renewable operators have seen it being done. And now it's in the peer-reviewed research as well. So we're seeing a complete flipping of the narrative from Bitcoin as net negative to Bitcoin actually looks like it can solve two of our more pressing environmental challenges.
That's an amazing narrative. Francesco, please go on. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, there's two things there. The first is that figure is tracking up.
Take on this. I also feel it's a battle. We are doing a battle in two fronts. Firstly, Bitcoin or energy usage, but then people question, even if you use 40% of not renewable is still too much. So we have to explain also the value of Bitcoin in one side and also the energy part on the other side.
Correct. And this really takes to the third point. People have an objection to Bitcoin's energy use because they have no understanding of its utility, and they have been fueled with a negative understanding about its utility. So you'll hear arguments such as Bitcoin is used by cyber criminals. I guess it's reasonable then that it uses a little bit of energy. Maybe it's even doing something more useful than Netflix, which we don't question the energy usage of. So yes, you're right. These different perspectives that we must understand what the sustainable energy use is, what the positive environmental benefits are, and what the true utility quantified of Bitcoin is today and what it has the potential to be in the future, then we get a proper understanding upon which to make rational decisions about how we should respond to this technology and whether we should form policies which are against it or supported innovation, whether we try to constrain its growth or whether we try to allow it to grow, and whether we see it as something that we should be investing in or something we should not be investing in, whether we see that it hinders our climate objectives or actually that it helps them. But we can only do that once we start to look beneath the surface.
Would say, let's talk a bit about talking about the relationship with the regulator, because Bitcoin is decentralized. Mining is a physical thing, so something can be weakened and has a lot to do with the policy of a country. We rely on the fact that there are many countries which mine, but on one country that could be an issue. So talking about the relationship with the regulators, the policymakers, there are some externalities which should be taken into account. And we just made the example about the methane emission being burned by in this process of mining. This way, making a favor to the environment, no? So taking a toxic gas out of the environment. So that's a net positive, and that's very easy to prove. So you, with your association, you are doing all of these studies, which are bit helpful, and some others like you. But I'm asking, what do you think is missing in the relationship with the policymaker? Do you think it's beneficial, could be beneficial for this research association like yours to start maybe partnering with some firm in the natural gas and starting to produce a proof of concept to bring to a table to a regulator? This way, proving that the numbers, the data, and the physical thing which is in place, and making the politician could have a visit to the place where the conversion happens and see with his own eyes that's all net green positive. Do you think, because we had also Lisa Hogg a few episodes ago, she said that big corporations, without making names, but they are not that interested because it's too small as a market right now. But if that can be seen like a venture for them, like a pilot study, and to put in place with a few machines, that can be beneficial for the political question. What do you think about that?
Came further than that. So we're past the point where pilot studies are necessary because this has now been done at scale. We have 3 million megatons of CO2 equivalent emissions that are mitigated every single year already through using vented methane or flared gas, previously flared gas already. We have getting up to 200 megawatts of Bitcoin mining that are coming off flared or vented methane sources. So we're actually well advanced beyond that already. What's now needed is simply the second part, which is conversations. The problem is that most regulators and policymakers are not even aware of this. So there is a massive information asymmetry. Their knowledge and their decisions are based on data which is 3 years old, based on 2021, where there was not so much of this happening, and also in 2021, where Bitcoin was predominantly from China. And yes, at that time, a lot of that was coal-based. So a lot of their objections were true at a point in time, but they're no longer true. And so it's our responsibility to update that so that they can make decisions which are based on today's data. And added to that has been the problem that sometimes there have been the odd peer-reviewed studies, such as UN University, which even though the study came out in 2023, its data was based on 2020-21. So it appears like new data, but in fact it's old data. So Canada was one of the first countries to adopt one of the most innovative strategies of regulatory acceptance towards Bitcoin. And the reason that that happened was very early on in Bitcoin's history, Andreas Antonopoulos met with some congressional subcommittees and the Canadian policymakers and parliamentarians and explained Bitcoin to them, so that then they were able to base their policies on data from someone who knew what he was talking about. If he hadn't done that, they would have based their policies on old data, bad data, and the opinions of people who did not know what they were talking about because they hadn't done the deep research that he'd done, and they hadn't done the work to convey the deep research into forms that other people could make decisions based on it. So we've got to start collapsing that information asymmetry and get in front of these people. The way we're going to now change some of the regulatory hostility, and not just regulatory hostility, but also investment hostility towards Bitcoin, is by smart conversations. Two things. It's the right conversation with the right people. And this is where we're all going to have to start collaborating, because no one here has a monopoly on any community of people. There's no one in Bitcoin who knows all the world's policymakers and regulators. There's no one who knows all the world's sovereign wealth funds, ESG investment committees. But collectively, we know a whole bunch of those people. And so by starting to say, hey, we need to have these conversations in these environments we haven't had them before, with people we haven't had them before, who've been left behind. And rather than criticizing them for being anti-Bitcoin, or how much did being criticized, how much did getting angry at someone ever change anyone's mind? Never. But how much did sitting down with someone, hearing their concerns and educating the curious, change people's minds? A lot more of the time. And so those are the conversations we must start having if we want to turn around those perceptions in the investment community and with regulators and policymakers.
Makes sense, because they are sensible to the public, to the voters. So yes, it makes sense. Alessandro, go ahead.
Yes, thanks, Daniel, on the point of the regulators. Another point will be on the change of narrative from 2022 to 2024. You shared also a nice slide saying how many articles were negative, then negative and positive, and some months we had also even more positive articles on Bitcoin mining. And we are seeing a similar trend overall, I think, for Bitcoin. Like in Q4 2022 was the dark age of the last cycle. When FTX collapsed, Bitcoin went to 15.5K. The ECB wrote Bitcoin is embarked on a road of relevance, and it was not considered as an asset. Energy usage were bad articles. Politics were against. Now we are seeing we have the ETF on one side. So the financial advisor actually tomorrow will start. Financial advisor from Morgan Stanley will start to pitch Bitcoin. First time in history, financial advisor of a wealth bank or investment bank, an important investment bank, will start to pitch about Bitcoin. We see the politics that is going towards. Trump was at the Bitcoin conference. Jeff Kennedy Jr. even more. It was also last year, and also the Democrats are not anymore so against as before. And we see also the narrative of energy usage changing. So can you elaborate on this, how it changed in the last 2 years? And if you see that at one point all the narratives will be like positive versus Bitcoin.
So this is something we should all be celebrating. So whilst there's still work ahead of us, it's
totally agree. Thanks for the explanation. And yeah, we will see likely also more and more positive articles. And also one good thing that you mentioned is there are I think less articles. Also because now in the last 2 years some misconceptions have been debunked. For example, use it only by criminals. I'm not hearing this anymore so much because now Bitcoin has a 15-year history. Another one is a bubble or tulip mania. I always explain bubble or tulip mania. It happens once and then it crashes and it never comes up again. Bitcoin is coming back from like a phoenix from the ashes every cycle. So there should be some value. And with less and less misconceptions, people, I think they are more careful on writing an article again. In 2022, it was easy to see many articles against and also against the Bitcoin mining. Now maybe people think again, also because we have your work, KPGM report, plus many other reports. And do you think this trend will continue? So,
very much so. If you look at people who have attempted to write environmental FUD about, or any sort of FUD actually, about Bitcoin, Elizabeth Warren, community noted 3.
And also the problem with mining, with the burden with it for people to understand, and also for the politicians, is that we assume that they should understand a bit more than the average user, but maybe it's not the truth. They reflect the population. They are almost regarding Bitcoin understanding almost like a normal person. So being the topic of mining a bit ancillary to the sort of value proposition of Bitcoin, maybe we can think that when BlackRock pushes it more and more as a store of value on the financial markets, then the Bitcoin mining understanding also will be more well received, because it depends also from the main driver, which are the markets, in my opinion. So, but we still have to do research, to produce works, to push for it. But maybe the only problem with mining is that it's too complicated for anybody who doesn't know Bitcoin first. So, sort of value Bitcoin in markets and first showcase, and then the mining, and then there is another world there to investigate and grow.
And that's where we've got to get good at simplifying it. People didn't shy away from explaining the value of apps which ran on the internet because of the underlying complexity of HTTP or TCP. So it was just a decision that in order for a technology to proliferate, we have to be better at talking about the utility to the specific people we're talking to, and emphasize some impulse control when it comes to talking around megawatts and megahertz. And if we can do that and just attune the message to the values and the understanding level of the person we're talking to, then I think we'll do a whole lot better.
Sure.
Another question I have is, so Satoshi Nakamoto wrote Bitcoin Core. Bitcoin is working that Bitcoin Core, once it's released, version 0.1 is fixed forever. And in fact, we can see that all the changes have been minor changes. There is Bitcoin mining is the same, block every 10 minutes, halving, and so on. I think the overall Bitcoiners group is impressed by how Satoshi Nakamoto or the team behind him, that was using this alias, found all the perfect recipe in the first shot. And on this, do you think that Satoshi or the team behind him knew the win-win-win situation for Bitcoin mining? Meaning now we will have a company like energy company partnering with a Bitcoin mining company and will be win for the energy company because they can give excess of energy, a win for the Bitcoin mining company because they have energy at low price, and a win for the environment because in case it's combusted or vented, in case it's vented or flared to the atmosphere, it will be combusted and it will be good for the atmosphere. Do you think this was foreseen before or we discovered later?
Well, I'm a data guy, so I look at the data and I say, is there even any evidence that this is something that Satoshi knew about or wrote about? And certainly he wasn't writing about it.
It will be also great to have more and more adoption in these terms. And when, if you have to bet when it will happen, that we will have maybe the majority of energy companies also using Bitcoin mining, do you foresee maybe in 10 years or it could happen in 2 or 3 years?
I think it's more of a 10-year horizon at the moment.
Okay. Because it will also take investments, it takes time.
Yeah, and you always have a long tail where some people will get it straight away and then others won't. And just feels like we're more on a 10-year trajectory at the moment. Again, that's based on today, but that could change.
But do you think also it could happen like an inflection point similar to, for example, for the Bitcoin price and Bitcoin as a store of value? Many, me as well, they think at one point there will be this inflection point where no one wanted to be in the first row, but no one also wants to be in the last row. So once it's agreed that Bitcoin is a store of value or a relatively good store of value for the majority, then there will be a run on having a portion in Bitcoin. Could it happen also with the Bitcoin mining? Like once we have enough energy companies, then
it's absolutely possible. Faster. And the other thing that will accelerate it is, again, just that story becoming more widely known. The bizarre thing is that if you're a solar operator, if you're using wind, or if you're wanting to set up microgrids, it absolutely makes no sense not to use Bitcoin mining because you are wasting so much energy.
Great conclusion. Francesco, please go ahead.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm also convinced that we talked also with Jesse Myers and other on this, the value of Bitcoin and is determined largely, in my opinion, and also in Jesse Myers' opinion in part, from the cost of production. So, as you say, that's really, really what gives value, fair value to the asset. So it was a great 15 years, but just in the beginning, majority of people not understanding what should be lucid, but will make it easier for them to grasp what really is important and with a small effort, not that difficult. Thank you so much, and it was a great night. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks also from me, Daniel. Thanks, Francesco. Thanks again for come here, and also I think in name of many Bitcoiners for the work that you are doing. As I was saying at the beginning, this is the hardest misconception that we need to debunk. And once we will have overall agreement that Bitcoin mining is good, is not consuming too much energy, mostly sustainable, and helping clean the environment, it will be a great moment for Bitcoin and will enhance more adoption. And once will happen, I think a good portion of the merit is because what you are doing, your team also, other people like Troy Cross or Dennis Porter, but for sure a portion of the merit will be on you and your hours you spend on this. Thanks from all the Bitcoiners.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
We will keep in touch via X. I will keep following you every time you post something very interesting. At least on all your posts.
Great. Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
And you, Danny, see you then in X. And for the listeners, see you in one of the next episodes in next Tuesday. Bye.